Sarah Mitchell had always been a morning person, but that Tuesday started differently. The coffee maker gurgled in the kitchen while she stood at their bedroom window, watching the sunrise paint the San Diego sky in soft pastels. Marcus was already gone, had been for 3 weeks now on what he could only tell her was an assignment. The Navy SEAL teams didn't share details, even with wives. She touched the glass, feeling the cool morning air seeping through. Their small apartment in Coronado was nothing fancy, but it was home. The walls were decorated with photos from their 2-year marriage, their wedding day at the beach, hiking trips in the mountains, quiet dinners where Marcus looked at her like she was the only person in the world. Now those photos felt like memories from someone else's life. The phone buzzed on the nightstand. Sarah's heart jumped, it always did when calls came early. Marcus had told her never to worry unless someone showed up at the door in dress uniforms, but the anxiety lived in her chest anyway, a constant companion since she'd become a military wife. "Hello," she answered, hoping to hear his voice. "Mrs. Mitchell?" The voice was unfamiliar, official. "This is Commander Rodriguez from Naval Special Warfare Command. I need you to listen carefully." Sarah's legs went weak. She sat down hard on the edge of the bed, gripping the phone. "Is Marcus, your husband, is alive, but there's been a situation. I need you to pack a bag immediately. Essential items only. You're being moved to a secure location for your safety." "My safety?" "I don't understand, Mrs. Mitchell. I know this is confusing, but we have credible intelligence that you may be targeted. Your husband's team has been compromised, and enemy operatives may attempt to use family members as leverage. This is a precautionary measure." Sarah's mind reeled. She'd always known Marcus's job was dangerous, but the danger was supposed to stay overseas, in places she couldn't pronounce. It wasn't supposed to follow her to their quiet apartment where she taught 3rd grade and worried about parent-teacher conferences. "How long?" she managed to ask. "Unknown at this time. Pack for at least a week. A team will be there in 20 minutes to escort you." 20 minutes. Sarah looked around their bedroom, at the life she'd built with Marcus. How do you pack a life into a bag in 20 minutes? She pulled out their largest suitcase and started throwing in clothes, not really seeing what she grabbed. Underwear, jeans, sweaters, her grandmother's necklace, the book she'd been reading, Marcus's favorite photo of them. Her hands shook as she tried to fold a dress. Everything felt surreal, like she was watching someone else's life fall apart. She'd known military wives who'd gone through deployments, separations, even widowhood, but she'd never imagined this, being hunted by people she'd never met because of a job she barely understood. The doorbell rang exactly 20 minutes later. Sarah looked through the peephole to see 2 men in civilian clothes, but their posture screamed military. She opened the door with her suitcase in hand. "Mrs. Mitchell? I'm Agent Thompson, this is Agent Davis. We're here to escort you to safety." Thompson was tall and serious, with kind eyes that reminded her of her father. Davis was younger, constantly scanning their surroundings. Both wore earpieces and moved with the same controlled awareness she recognized in Marcus. "Where are we going?" Sarah asked as they loaded her bag into a black SUV. "Somewhere safe," Thompson replied. "Your husband specifically requested our best protection protocols." As they drove away from Coronado, Sarah watched her neighborhood disappear in the rearview mirror. Mrs. Patterson was watering her flowers, completely oblivious that her neighbor was fleeing from international terrorists or whoever these people were. A jogger passed by, headphones in, lost in his morning routine. The normalcy of it all made Sarah want to cry. The drive took 3 hours, winding through California's back roads until they reached what looked like a corporate retreat center nestled in the mountains. High fences, security cameras, and armed guards told a different story. This wasn't a vacation destination. "Welcome to Sanctuary Point," Thompson said as they approached the gates. "It's a secure facility for military families in protective custody. You'll have everything you need here." Sarah's room was comfortable but impersonal, a hotel room designed to house people whose lives had been temporarily erased. She sat on the bed and, finally, allowed herself to cry. Not the quiet tears she'd shed during Marcus's deployments, but deep, shaking sobs for the life that had just been ripped away from her. A knock interrupted her breakdown. A woman about her age stood in the doorway, holding a cup of tea and wearing a sympathetic smile. "I'm Jennifer," she said. "My husband's Army Special Forces. Been here 3 weeks now. Thought you might want some company." Sarah accepted the tea gratefully. "How do you do this? How do you just wait?" Jennifer sat in the room's single chair. "One day at a time. Sometimes 1 hour at a time. The hardest part is not knowing how long it'll last." "Have you heard from your husband?" "Twice. Brief calls to let me know he's okay. The operations they're running, they can't risk much communication." Over the next few days, Sarah fell into a strange routine. Breakfast in the communal dining room with other displaced military wives. Morning walks around the secure perimeter. Afternoon reading in the small library. Evening phone calls that never came. She met Maria, whose Marine husband had been missing for 6 weeks. Lisa, whose Navy pilot husband was somewhere in the Pacific. Each woman carried the same weight, the same uncertainty. They'd all signed up for military life, knowing their husbands would deploy, would face danger. None had expected to become targets themselves. The secure facility had everything: a gym, a small chapel, even a playground for the women with children. But it was still a prison, gilded though it might be. Sarah couldn't leave, couldn't go to work, couldn't live her life. She existed in a bubble of safety that felt increasingly suffocating. On her 4th day at Sanctuary Point, Thompson found her in the library. "Mrs. Mitchell, we've received word from your husband's team. They've successfully completed their primary objective, but they're still in active operations. Your security status remains unchanged for now." "What does that mean exactly?" Thompson hesitated. "The people who were targeting you are part of a larger network. Until we can confirm all threats have been neutralized, you need to stay here." Sarah closed her book. "And if that never happens?" "It will. Your husband and his team are very good at what they do." That night, Sarah lay awake staring at the ceiling. She thought about the morning when everything changed, how normal it had seemed. She'd worried about her student's upcoming test, whether to make chicken or pasta for dinner, if Marcus would call that day. Simple, everyday concerns that now felt like luxuries. She thought about Marcus, wherever he was, whatever he was doing. He'd told her once that the worst part of his job wasn't the danger, it was knowing that danger could reach the people he loved. She'd assured him she could handle it, that she was stronger than she looked. Now she wondered if she'd been naive. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Jennifer peeked in. "Can't sleep either?" Sarah shook her head. Jennifer came in and sat on the edge of the bed. "Want to know what keeps me sane?" Jennifer asked. "I imagine the moment when this is over. When I see Tom walking through that door, when we can go home, when life goes back to normal. It might be a different normal than before, but it'll be ours. What if it doesn't get better? What if this is just how things are now?" Jennifer was quiet for a moment. "Then, we adapt. We find a way to be happy anyway. That's what loving a warrior means. You learn to live with uncertainty, to find peace in chaos." Sarah nodded, though she wasn't sure she believed it yet. She was still learning what it meant to be a military wife, still discovering how much strength she actually had. The next morning brought news that would test that strength in ways she couldn't imagine. Thompson appeared at her door before breakfast, his expression grave. "Mrs. Mitchell, we need to talk. There's been a development." Sarah's blood turned cold. "Marcus?" "He's alive, but his team has encountered significant resistance. The enemy forces are more organized than we initially believed. We're implementing additional security measures." "What kind of measures?" "You're being moved to an even more secure location. And, Mrs. Mitchell, this operation may take longer than we hoped." As Sarah packed her bag again, she realized this was just the beginning. Her old life, the one where her biggest worry was lesson plans and grocery shopping, was gone. In its place was something unknown, something that would require reserves of courage she wasn't sure she possessed. But, as she looked at Marcus's photo on the nightstand, she made a decision. She would learn to be brave, not just for him, but for herself. Whatever came next, she would face it with the same determination that had made her fall in love with a man who ran toward danger while others ran away. The black SUV waited outside, ready to take her deeper into a world she'd never wanted to enter. Sarah took a deep breath, picked up her bag, and stepped forward into the unknown. The helicopter's rotors thundered overhead as Sarah pressed her face to the small window, watching the landscape blur beneath them. This wasn't the gentle transport she'd expected. The aircraft banked sharply, and she caught sight of two more helicopters flanking them, an escort formation that made her stomach clench with fresh anxiety. Agent Thompson, seated across from her in the military transport, spoke into his headset over the noise. His expression had grown increasingly tense since they'd left Sanctuary Point 6 hours ago. Whatever was happening, it was bigger than anyone had initially believed. "Where are we going?" Sarah shouted over the rotor noise. Thompson pulled his headset away from one ear. "Classified location. More secure than where you were." "How much more secure can it get?" He didn't answer, which was answer enough. The helicopter began its descent toward what looked like an abandoned industrial complex surrounded by desert. As they drew closer, Sarah could see the facility was anything but abandoned. Personnel moved with military precision across the compound. Vehicles she didn't recognize were parked in organized rows. This wasn't a safe house, this was a military installation. The landing was smooth despite the wind. As the rotors wound down, Sarah saw armed guards approaching the aircraft. Thompson unbuckled his harness and motioned for her to follow. "Mrs. Mitchell, from this point forward, your security clearance requires you to sign additional documents and follow strict protocols. This facility doesn't officially exist." Sarah's legs trembled as she stepped onto the tarmac. The two escort helicopters landed nearby, disgorging more personnel, all armed, all serious. Whatever threat had brought her here was significant enough to warrant this level of protection. A woman in military fatigues approached them. Her bearing suggested high rank, though Sarah couldn't read the insignia. "Mrs. Mitchell, I'm Colonel Martinez. I'll be overseeing your security from this point forward. I know this is overwhelming, but I need you to understand that your safety is directly connected to your husband's mission success." "I don't understand." "Marcus is Navy SEAL. He goes on missions all the time. This has never happened before." Colonel Martinez guided her toward a concrete building. "Your husband's team intercepted intelligence about a terrorist cell planning attacks on U.S. military families. The operation to stop them has evolved beyond original parameters. The enemy has resources and reach we didn't anticipate." Inside the building, Sarah was processed like a new recruit. Photographs, fingerprints, background verification she didn't understand. The reality of her situation crystallized as she watched classified documents being prepared with her name on them. "Colonel, how long am I going to be here?" "Unknown. Your husband's team is currently engaged in active operations across multiple countries. Until they neutralize the entire network, you remain at risk." Sarah was assigned quarters in a residential section of the facility. Her room was larger than at Sanctuary Point but felt more institutional. A single bed, desk, dresser, and small bathroom. The window showed a view of the compound's interior courtyard, where she could see other families in similar circumstances. At dinner in the communal mess hall, she met families who'd been there for months. Children who attended classes taught by military personnel. Spouses who'd learned to live in a state of suspended animation, waiting for operations they couldn't be told about to conclude successfully. "The hardest part," said Rebecca, whose Air Force husband had been deployed for 8 months, "is realizing you're not just waiting for them to come home. You're waiting to find out if you'll ever have a normal life again." Sarah pushed food around her plate, appetite gone. "Do you regret it? Marrying into the military?" Rebecca considered the question. I regret the naive assumptions I made about what it would mean. I thought deployment meant he'd be gone, then he'd come back, and life would resume. I never imagined scenarios where the life we built together could just disappear. That night, Sarah lay in her narrow bed listening to the sounds of the facility. Generators humming. Periodic announcements over intercoms. Footsteps in corridors that never seemed to quiet completely. This place operated around the clock, a machine designed to protect people whose lives had been threatened by forces they'd never see coming. She thought about Marcus, tried to imagine where he was, what he was doing. In 2 years of marriage, she'd learned to live with the gaps in her knowledge about his work. She'd accepted that there were things he couldn't tell her, operations he couldn't discuss. But this felt different. This felt like the war had come home. On her third day at the facility, Colonel Martinez called her to the administration building. "Mrs. Mitchell, we've received communication from your husband's commanding officer. The situation has escalated. The terrorist network they're pursuing has capabilities that exceed our initial intelligence assessment." Sarah gripped the arms of her chair. What does that mean for Marcus? It means his mission timeline is extended indefinitely. And it means the threats against military families, including you, remain active. How active? Colonel Martinez hesitated before opening a file on her desk. 3 weeks ago, the wife of a Delta Force operator was kidnapped in Virginia. She was rescued, but the incident confirms these aren't idle threats. The people your husband is hunting have resources, international connections, and the willingness to target non-combatants. Sarah felt the room spin slightly. Kidnapped? She's safe now. But the incident changed our threat assessment protocols. That's why you're here instead of at a standard protection facility. What happens if they never catch these people? What happens if this just never ends? Colonel Martinez closed the file. Mrs. Mitchell, your husband and his team are among the most skilled operators in the world. They will complete their mission. But I can't give you a timeline. That evening, Sarah called her parents for the first time since leaving Coronado. The conversation was carefully monitored and she couldn't say where she was, but hearing their voices helped ground her. "We're so worried about you, sweetheart," her mother said. "Can't you just come home until this is over?" "It's not that simple, Mom. I have to stay where it's safe." "Safe from what?" "Sarah, you're scaring us." Sarah looked around the secure phone room, at the guards visible through the reinforced glass window. "I can't explain everything, but Marcus's job has gotten complicated. I just need you to know I'm okay and I'm being taken care of." After the call, she walked the facility's secure perimeter. Other families were doing the same evening constitutionals within the confines of their protected world. Children played in a small playground area while their mothers watched with eyes that carried too much knowledge about the world's dangers. She met David, a Marine whose wife had been at the facility for 6 months while he pursued a terrorist cell through Southeast Asia. His 2 young children treated the compound like an extended vacation, oblivious to the reasons they couldn't go home. "The kids adapt," David said, watching his daughter navigate the monkey bars. "Adults have a harder time. We understand what we've lost." "Do you think it's worth it?" Sarah asked. "The sacrifice, I mean. Everything we give up so they can do these jobs." David was quiet for a long moment. "Ask me again when this is over." "Right now, I'm too close to it to see clearly." On her 5th day at the facility, Sarah was summoned to Colonel Martinez's office urgently. When she arrived, she found the colonel on a secure phone, her expression grave. "Understood. We'll implement immediately." Colonel Martinez hung up and turned to Sarah. "Mrs. Mitchell, we've received intelligence about an imminent threat. The facility is going to enhanced lockdown status." "What kind of threat?" "The terrorist network has obtained detailed information about this location. We believe they may attempt a direct assault." Sarah's knees gave out. She sat down hard in the nearest chair. "They know where I am?" "We're not certain. But we can't take risks." You and the other families are being moved to the facility's most secure section. Essential personnel only will have access. Within an hour, Sarah found herself in an underground bunker complex she hadn't known existed. The accommodations were sparse but functional. More importantly, they were protected by multiple layers of security and blast-resistant construction. The families gathered in a common area that felt like a combination of bomb shelter and waiting room. Children sensed their parents' increased anxiety and became clingy. Conversations were muted, tense. Everyone understood they'd crossed another threshold into a more dangerous reality. Rebecca found Sarah in the corner, staring at the concrete walls. "You okay?" Sarah laughed, but it came out hollow. "No. I'm really not okay. A month ago I was worried about parent-teacher conferences. Now I'm hiding in an underground bunker from international terrorists." "It changes you," Rebecca said. "Not just the fear, but the knowledge that the world is more dangerous than you thought. That the people you love willingly walk into that danger. How do you live with it? You find a strength you didn't know you had. You learn that love means different things than you thought it did. You discover that some things are worth this kind of sacrifice." Sarah nodded, though she wasn't sure she believed it yet. The woman she'd been a month ago, the teacher who planned lessons and graded papers and worried about normal things, felt like someone she'd read about in a book. This new person, this woman hiding underground while her husband fought an invisible war, was still a stranger to her. But, as she looked around the bunker at the other families, at the children playing games while their world shifted around them, at the spouses who'd learned to carry impossible burdens with grace, she began to understand something. This wasn't just about surviving until the danger passed. This was about discovering who she really was when everything familiar was stripped away. The speakers crackled with an announcement: "All personnel to stations. Enhanced security protocols now in effect." Sarah closed her eyes and thought of Marcus, wherever he was in the world. She pictured his face, remembered his voice telling her to stay strong, to stay safe. She realized that her strength wasn't just for her own survival, it was part of his mission too. Her safety was his peace of mind. Her courage was his strength. When she opened her eyes, she felt different. Still scared, still uncertain, but no longer powerless. She was a warrior's wife, and that meant she had her own battles to fight, her own kind of courage to find. The underground bunker had been their world for 2 weeks when the explosion shook the earth above them. Sarah felt the vibration through the concrete floor, saw dust rain from the ceiling as emergency lights flickered on. Around her, the other military families reacted with practiced calm that spoke to experiences she was still learning to navigate. "Everyone remain seated," Colonel Martinez announced through the intercom. "We are implementing Code Black protocols." This is not a drill. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. Code Black, she'd learned the facility's color-coded alert system during her briefings. It meant active threat, possible breach of perimeter security. It meant the danger they'd been hiding from had found them. Rebecca moved to sit beside her, bringing 8-year-old Emma with her. The little girl had been at the facility so long she treated security alerts like tornado drills at school, inconvenient but routine. "What does Code Black mean?" Sarah whispered. "It means Marcus and the others better finish their job soon," Rebecca replied, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. The bunker's communication system crackled to life. Colonel Martinez's voice carried the controlled tension of someone managing a crisis. "We have confirmed hostile activity in the area. All civilians are to remain in secure quarters until further notice. Military personnel are responding to the threat." Through the bunker's thick walls, Sarah could hear muffled sounds, vehicles moving, shouted orders, what might have been gunfire in the distance. The facility above them had become a battlefield, and they were trapped beneath it. Hours passed in a strange suspension of time. Meals were delivered by rotating security personnel who wouldn't answer questions about what was happening above. The children grew restless, sensing the adults' increased anxiety despite efforts to maintain normalcy. Sarah found herself thinking about her students back in San Diego. Were they wondering where their teacher had gone? Had the school been told she was sick, on family emergency, or had they simply been assigned a substitute without explanation? Her third graders were working on their multiplication tables. Such a simple, normal concern that now felt like it belonged to someone else's life. On the second day of Code Black, a new face appeared among the security personnel, a Navy SEAL Sarah didn't recognize, but whose bearing reminded her intensely of Marcus. He spoke quietly with Colonel Martinez before approaching the family area. "Mrs. Mitchell? I'm Chief Petty Officer Rodriguez. I have a message from your husband." Sarah's heart stopped. A message meant Marcus was alive, but the formal delivery suggested complications. "He wanted me to tell you that he's thinking about you every day and that he's proud of your strength. He also wanted you to know that he and his team have made significant progress, but the operation has become more complex than anticipated." "Is he safe?" Rodriguez hesitated, a pause that lasted only seconds but felt like hours. "He's with his team. They're doing what they do best." It wasn't really an answer, but Sarah understood it was all she was going to get. In the world Marcus inhabited, safety was relative, and survival was measured in completed missions rather than personal well-being. "Chief Rodriguez, can you tell me what's happening here? The explosions, the lockdown, are we actually under attack?" "The facility has experienced probing actions by hostile forces. We believe they're testing our defenses, gathering intelligence about our security measures. We've repelled their attempts, but we're maintaining heightened alert status." Sarah absorbed this information. Probing actions. Testing defenses. The clinical military language couldn't hide the reality that people with weapons and hostile intent were actively trying to reach her, to use her as leverage against Marcus and his teammates. That night, unable to sleep on her narrow bunk, Sarah walked the bunker's limited corridors. The space was designed for functionality, not comfort. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows that made everything feel temporary and urgent. She found herself in the small chapel area, where a few other family members often gathered for quiet reflection. Tonight, she was alone with her thoughts and the weight of realizations that kept growing heavier. She'd married Marcus knowing he was a Navy SEAL, understanding intellectually that his job involved danger. But the reality of military life, the way it could consume not just the service member but everyone who loved them, had blindsided her. She wasn't just waiting for her husband to come home from deployment. She was living in a state of perpetual vulnerability, her safety dependent on operations happening in places she'd never seen, against enemies she'd never meet. A soft knock interrupted her meditation. Jennifer, the army wife she'd first met at Sanctuary Point, joined her in the chapel. "Couldn't sleep either?" Sarah shook her head. "I keep thinking about choices. About the life I thought I was choosing when I married Marcus versus the life I'm actually living. Regrets? Not regrets exactly. But I wonder if I was naive. If I really understood what I was signing up for." Jennifer sat beside her on the simple wooden bench. "You want to know what I've learned in 10 years of military marriage? You can't really understand it until you live it. The separations, the uncertainty, the way normal life can just disappear overnight. Nobody really knows what they're choosing. So how do you do it? How do you keep choosing it every day? Because love isn't just about the easy parts. It's about who you become when everything else gets stripped away. And the person I'd become through loving Tom, even with all this chaos, is someone I respect more than the person I was before." Over the following days, the Code Black alert gradually lifted, but the facility remained on high security status. Families were allowed back to the upper levels during daylight hours, though armed guards were now visible everywhere. The message was clear: the threat was ongoing, and safety was a temporary condition that required constant vigilance. Sarah began to establish routines that helped her feel less powerless. She volunteered in the facility's small school, helping other military children with reading and mathematics. Teaching again, even in this limited capacity, reminded her that she had skills and value beyond being Marcus's wife in need of protection. She also started a support group for the newer military spouses who, like herself, were struggling to adapt to the reality of their situation. These weren't the deployment support groups she'd read about, this was something different. These were women learning to live with the knowledge that their love had made them targets. "The hardest part," said Maria, a Marine wife who'd arrived the week before, "is feeling like I'm being punished for falling in love with the wrong person. Like I should have known better." "But we didn't fall in love with the wrong people," Sarah found herself saying. "We fell in love with people who do necessary work in a dangerous world. The fact that danger sometimes reaches us doesn't make them wrong choices, it makes them costly ones." 3 weeks into the enhanced security protocol, Sarah received her first direct communication from Marcus in over a month. Not through intermediaries or official messages, but a brief, encrypted video call that felt like oxygen after nearly drowning. His face appeared on the secure monitor, leaner than she remembered, with new lines around his eyes that spoke to stresses she couldn't imagine. But his smile when he saw her was pure joy. "Hey, beautiful. How are you holding up?" Sarah wanted to cry, laugh, and rage all at once. Instead, she focused on memorizing his face, the sound of his voice, the way he was looking at her like she was the only thing that mattered in the world. "I'm okay. Scared, but okay. Are you safe?" "I'm with my team. We're making progress, but this operation has become bigger than anyone anticipated. The network we're dismantling has tentacles everywhere. That's why your security situation has been so intense. When can you come home?" Marcus's expression grew serious. "I don't know yet. But, Sarah, I need you to know that everything I'm doing out here, every risk I'm taking, is so that we can have a life together without this hanging over us. A real life, where you don't have to live underground and I don't have to worry about you being safe." "I understand. But, Marcus, I need you to understand something too. I'm not the same person you left. This experience, it's changing me. I'm learning things about myself, about what I'm capable of, that I never knew before." "What kind of things?" "I'm stronger than I thought. Braver. But also more aware of what love really costs. When this is over, we're going to have to rebuild our life together with this knowledge." Marcus nodded slowly. "Are you willing to do that? To rebuild with me, knowing what you know now?" Sarah looked at this man she'd married, this warrior who'd willingly entered hell to protect not just her but countless others who would never know his name. She thought about the woman she'd been when she woke up that morning a month ago, worried about lesson plans and dinner menus. She thought about the woman she was becoming, someone who could find strength in underground bunkers and hope in the midst of international conflicts. "Yes," she said. "But not the same life we had before. A different one. A better one. One built on truth instead of assumptions." The call lasted only 10 minutes, but it changed everything. When the screen went dark, Sarah felt like she'd crossed an invisible threshold. She was no longer just surviving this experience, she was growing through it, becoming someone she'd never expected to be but was learning to respect. That night, as sirens wailed somewhere in the distance and armed guards patrolled the corridors, Sarah wrote in the journal she'd started keeping. Not just recording events, but processing the transformation happening inside her. The scared teacher who'd packed a bag in 20 minutes was still there, but she was sharing space with someone stronger, someone who understood that love sometimes required courage she'd never known she possessed. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new fears, new tests of the faith she was building in herself and in the love that had brought her to this place. But tonight, she felt ready for whatever came next. The call came at dawn on a Tuesday, exactly 8 weeks after Sarah's world had first been turned upside down. Colonel Martinez appeared at her quarters with an expression Sarah had learned to read carefully, not the grim efficiency of crisis management, but something that might have been cautious relief. "Mrs. Mitchell, we've received word from JSOC. Operation Seahawk has been successfully concluded. The terrorist network has been neutralized." Sarah's legs gave out. She sat down hard on her narrow bed, gripping the sheets as the words sank in. "Does that mean your husband's team eliminated the last cell leaders yesterday? The threats against military families have been terminated. You're free to return to your normal life." Normal life. The phrase felt foreign, like a language she'd once spoken but had forgotten during her time underground. Sarah looked around her small room at the life she'd built in captivity, books she'd read, photos she'd arranged on the small desk, routines that had kept her sane in an insane situation. When can I see Marcus? His team is being debriefed overseas. He should be stateside within the week. In the meantime, you can return to your home in Coronado immediately if you choose, or you can remain here until he returns. Sarah considered this. The thought of their empty apartment, of walking back into the life she'd been living before any of this happened, felt both wonderful and terrifying. She'd been fundamentally changed by these 8 weeks. Could she simply slip back into who she'd been before? I'd like to go home, she said. But I want to say goodbye to the people here first. Over the next day, Sarah found herself having conversations she'd never expected to have. Rebecca was staying at the facility until her husband returned from Afghanistan. Jennifer had received word that her husband's mission would continue for several more months. Maria had learned just that morning that her Marine husband had been wounded but would recover. I feel guilty leaving, Sarah admitted to Rebecca as they sat in the common area for the last time. Don't, Rebecca replied firmly. You've earned your freedom. And, besides, you're proof that this ends, that we do get to go home eventually. The children Sarah had tutored made her cards with crayon drawings of helicopters and sunshine. Their mothers hugged her with understanding that transcended words. These people had become family in a way she'd never experienced before, bonded not by blood but by shared danger, mutual support, and the unique understanding that came from loving people who walked willingly into the world's darkest places. Agent Thompson drove her back to Coronado, the same route they'd taken 8 weeks earlier but in reverse. The landscape looked different now, not because it had changed, but because Sarah had. She noticed details she'd missed before, the way morning light hit the mountains, the colors of wildflowers growing along the highway, the simple miracle of being able to travel freely without armed escorts or security protocols. Their apartment building looked smaller than she remembered. Mrs. Patterson was in her garden again, as if she'd never moved from that spot. Sarah wondered what explanation had been given for her sudden disappearance, whether anyone had noticed she was gone. Inside their apartment, everything was exactly as she'd left it. The coffee cup she'd abandoned in the sink that frantic morning. Marcus's running shoes by the door. The book she'd been reading, still open to page 47. It felt like walking through a museum exhibit of her former life. Sarah moved through the room slowly, reacquainting herself with the person she'd been. The lesson plans on her desk for classes she'd never taught. The grocery list on the refrigerator for meals she'd never cooked. The calendar with Marcus's expected return date, a date that had come and gone weeks ago while she was hidden underground. She called the school district to explain her absence, using the cover story she'd been given, family emergency that required extended travel. They were understanding, even offered to hold her position until the following semester if she needed more time to readjust. Sarah realized she did need time, just not for the reasons they imagined. That evening, she stood in their bedroom looking at the photos that had sustained her through the darkest moments at the facility. The hiking trip where Marcus had proposed. Their wedding day with her in a simple white dress and him in his dress blues. The quiet dinner where they talked about buying a house, having children, building a future together. Looking at those photos now, Sarah could see the innocence in her own eyes, the assumption that love was enough to protect them from the complexities of the world Marcus inhabited. The woman in those pictures had believed that military life meant deployments and homecomings, that the danger stayed safely compartmentalized in foreign countries with names she couldn't pronounce. 3 days later, the call came that changed everything again, but this time, in the best possible way. Sarah? It's me. I'm coming home. Marcus's voice sounded different over the phone, older, carrying weight she couldn't see but could feel. Like her, he'd been changed by the experience. When? My flight lands at Lindbergh at 6 tonight. Can you pick me up? Sarah's throat tightened with emotion. Of course. Marcus, I know, he said quietly. We have a lot to talk about. But, first, I just want to hold you. Sarah arrived at the airport an hour early, too nervous to stay at home. She watched planes land and taxi, each one potentially carrying the man she'd married but had never known could be taken from her so completely. She thought about the conversations they would need to have, the ways their relationship would need to evolve to accommodate the knowledge they'd both gained about what their love could cost. When Marcus appeared in the arrival area, Sarah almost didn't recognize him. He was thinner, his eyes holding depths that hadn't been there before. But when he saw her, his face lit up with the same joy she'd seen in their brief video call, the same love that had sustained her through the darkest moments of the past 2 months. They held each other in the middle of the crowded airport, neither caring about the people flowing around them. Sarah felt the tension he carried in his shoulders, the way he held her like he was afraid she might disappear. She realized he'd been as afraid for her as she'd been for him. "Let's go home," Marcus whispered against her hair. The drive was quiet, both of them needing time to process the surreal experience of being together again. At red lights, Marcus would reach over and touch her hand, as if confirming she was real. Sarah found herself studying his profile, noting the new lines around his eyes, the way his jaw was set differently than before. At their apartment, they sat on the couch where they'd watched movies and planned their future, but the easy intimacy they'd once shared felt fragile, requiring careful reconstruction. "Tell me about it," Sarah said. "As much as you can." Marcus was quiet for a long moment. "It was worse than we thought. The network had been planning coordinated attacks on military families across the country. Your location, the locations of dozens of other wives and children, they had detailed intelligence. If we hadn't intercepted their communications when we did." He didn't finish the sentence, but Sarah understood. The facility, the underground bunkers, the months of separation, all of it had been necessary to prevent something much worse. "The hardest part," Marcus continued, "was knowing you were in danger because of me. That my job, my choices, had made you a target." "And the hardest part for me," Sarah replied, "was learning that love isn't just about being together. It's about being willing to be apart when necessary, to make sacrifices for something bigger than ourselves." They talked until dawn, sharing experiences they'd never expected to have, processing fears they'd never known existed. Marcus told her about sleepless nights in foreign countries, worrying about her safety while tracking terrorists across 3 continents. Sarah told him about learning to live with uncertainty, about finding strength in underground bunkers and building community with strangers who understood impossible circumstances. "I'm not the same person you married," Sarah said as morning light filtered through their curtains. "Neither am I," Marcus replied. "Is that okay?" Sarah considered this question, thinking about the teacher who'd packed a bag in 20 minutes versus the woman who'd learned to find hope in the midst of international conflicts. Thinking about the man who'd left for what should have been a routine mission versus the warrior who'd spent 2 months hunting down threats to protect not just her but families he'd never met. "It's better than okay," she said finally. "I like who we've become. I like who we're becoming." Over the following weeks, they rebuilt their life with intentionality they'd never had before. Sarah returned to teaching, but with a perspective that helped her connect with students facing their own uncertainties. Marcus resumed his duties with the SEAL teams, but with new protocols that provided better support for military families facing unique threats. They attended counseling together, not because their relationship was broken but because they wanted to build something stronger than what they'd had before. They learned to communicate about fears they'd never discussed, to plan for uncertainties they'd never considered, to love each other with the full knowledge of what that love might require. 6 months later, they bought a house, not the impulsive decision of young newlyweds, but the careful choice of partners who understood that building a life together meant preparing for possibilities they couldn't predict. They set up a room as Sarah's office, another for Marcus's gear, and a third that they left empty, ready for whatever the future might bring. On their 3rd wedding anniversary, they stood on the beach where Marcus had proposed, watching the sunset paint the sky in colors that reminded Sarah of that first morning when everything had changed. But this time, the unknown didn't terrify her. This time, she knew what she was capable of, what they were capable of together. "Any regrets?" Marcus asked, echoing a question that had haunted both of them during the dark months. Sarah thought about the teacher she'd been, worried about parent-teacher conferences and grocery lists. She thought about the woman she'd become, someone who'd learned that love sometimes required courage she'd never known she possessed. "No regrets," she said, taking his hand. "Just gratitude for who we've become." Above them, a helicopter passed in the distance, probably a routine training flight from Coronado. Sarah watched it without fear, understanding finally that some things were worth protecting, worth fighting for, worth the risks they required. Their love had been tested in ways they'd never imagined, and it had emerged stronger, deeper, more real than what they'd started with. The future was still uncertain. Marcus's job would always carry dangers, and their love would always require sacrifices. But Sarah had learned something crucial during those weeks underground: uncertainty wasn't the enemy of love. Fear wasn't the opposite of courage. And sometimes the best way to protect something precious was to be willing to risk everything for it. As they walked back to their car, hand in hand, Sarah realized she was no longer afraid of the unknown. She'd learned to find strength in uncertainty, hope in difficult circumstances, and love that could survive anything the world might throw at them. "Sweetheart," Marcus said, using the endearment that had started this whole journey, "ready to go home? With you?" Sarah replied, understanding finally what home really meant. "Always."